promised you we would paint watercolor poppies this summer. It would be a great way to explore warm red pigments and practice some negative painting technique. So let me take you on a full journey from finding a beautiful flower to figuring out our technique and watercolor pigments that work best, so you can paint your own poppy and apply this method of study and palette testing to any of your watercolor work. I went to a botanical garden nearby to find some good references for us. Let's look up close and really study the petals and the center of the flower. Lots of warm reds and some fairly complicated stamens that will require deeper, darker values. Lots of beautiful colors to choose from depending on the brand of watercolors you use. I always look at my dot charts first before I start. Winsor & Newton has this gorgeous pigment called Scarlet Lake. It's transparent, so we can glaze it many times and build our shadows. I may use it in combination with Winsor Orange Red shade for some variation in color temperature. From Core, I will use Dioxazine Purple because we need something rich and dark for the stamens. I recommend not using black, it's too harsh. And I'll show you a study in just a minute, and we will talk about some alternatives you can find in your palette. You can add some transparent or semi-transparent yellows and oranges to warm everything up, bring it over closer to the orangey side of the red spectrum. And I'm still thinking about which one to use. Maybe Hansa Yellow Deep, maybe Transparent Pyro Orange. We will figure this out together by the end of this video. A few swatches just to make sure I'm on the right track and not tempted to use darker, cooler reds. And we're ready to do a study to test the colors and figure out the technique. I used too many pigments, of course, but this is just to test some potential alternatives and to see what else I may be missing before I make a full tutorial for my Patreon with a more limited palette. For example, what I'm seeing is that Quinacridone Violet from Core will work quite well instead of or in combination with Dioxazine Purple. Perylene Violet would also be a good alternative or a complement to the purple color in the center and on the edges of the petals. Also, much of this wet on wet work is probably unnecessary. It would be easier to get the first layer dry and then add those shadows wet on dry in a more controlled way. Notice too, we have lots of options for our yellows and oranges, and I think we don't need to introduce them right away in the first layer like I did here. They can be glazed on top of red in the final layer just to simplify things. I think I will do Hansa Yellow Deep for the lightest parts. New Gamboge would also work well. It's transparent and even lighter and less orangey. And for glazing in the last layer, I think I will just use one of my favorite oranges, Transparent Pyro Orange, either from Core or Daniel Smith. So let's do a clean version, maybe from a different angle. Now that we've figured out the palette and technique, I can focus on perfecting the composition. And you know, if you're following me on Instagram, Facebook, or Patreon, that the final version will have a butterfly, and that would be a separate tutorial. So do subscribe and turn that little notification bell on so you can see when I post it next week. Thank you, of course, for all your likes and shares. It really helps my channel, and your comments always make my day. So I really like how this petal turned out. I only used Scarlet Lake and different proportions of water, a little bit of purple on the edges, and now let's let it dry. We'll follow up later with shadows and orange glaze. The second layer is for larger shadows using the same colors but darker values. This part in the center may be confusing to paint, but that's where negative painting technique will solve everything for us. You can see there are really only two main values, a lighter one and a darker one, almost black. So that's how we can paint it, by covering the entire area with a lighter mixture, just the overall silhouette of these dark stamens. Let it dry, and then we can use negative painting technique to paint around the highlights with darker colors. And suddenly you see the shapes of the stamens emerge. That's all it is. Negative painting means painting around something light. And you can check out my tutorial on negative painting technique after this. I left the link in the video description below. I'll add Perylene Violet from Daniel Smith to soften the contrast between red and purple. It's like I'm building a little bridge, so to speak, in my palette between my reds and my purples, making everything look a little bit more cohesive. The third layer is for the smallest and darkest shadows. It's also where I can glaze my orange. So transparent pyro orange is perfect for this. You can even use something like quinacridone burnt orange. It's a little bit more on the brown side. If you happen to have it, brown madder from Winsor Newton would work well. Again, a little bit more on the brown side. So anything transparent, warm, brownish orange is good for glazing here in the last layer, because it will preserve the layers underneath and you can really water it down to a barely visible splash of color. Let's add some texture just for fun. And and this is what it looks like now. I'm glad you followed along as I figured out this flower, and I hope you enjoyed this little journey with me. Full tutorial for this composition in real time, including the butterfly and the black and white outlines, will be on my Patreon in July, so do subscribe if you enjoy long, complex watercolor compositions and you want to level up your botanical painting skills. Let me know what else you want us to paint together, and if you have any questions about watercolor poppies, I'm still working on the other two and will likely be adding some buds. I will see you next week with some tips and the painting process for the butterfly. Thank you for watching and painting with me.